The Ashford Tower lobby was everything money could build. Rosie Vale had nearly reached the elevator when a security guard grabbed her wheelchair and shoved her sideways. A small metal toy car fell from her pocket and rang across the marble. A second guard blocked her path. The crowd said nothing. Then the maintenance corridor door opened, and a black man in a navy work shirt stepped out, a wrench at his belt, grease on his forearm, and stood between Rosie and the two guards without speaking. Sarah Ashford stepped off the elevator and looked at him with open contempt. The morning had started the way all of Caleb Thorne's morning started, with 2 lunches packed and stacked in a canvas bag, one of them marked with a hand-drawn star in green marker, because Wren liked stars, and because being 7 meant the small things still counted as proof that someone loved you. Caleb was 38 years old, a black man from the South Side, and he had built his entire week around the 15-minute window between the school bell at 3:15 and the moment Wren came out through the heavy front doors looking for his car. He drove east through streets still damp from overnight rain. The wipers moved once every 12 seconds. The radio was off. Wren sat in the passenger seat with her backpack between her knees and her gaze fixed on the gray Chicago sky out the window. "At the red light on Belmont," she said. "Dad, do you have any brothers or sisters?" Caleb kept his eyes on the road. The question was not new, but it had been a while. He took a breath. "I had a sister. We got separated when she was little." Wren was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet she had learned to use around questions her father carried. She knew which questions he answered with the surface of his voice, and which ones he answered from somewhere deeper. This one was the deeper kind. "Are you still looking for her?" "Yeah," he said. "I am." She nodded the way she did when she was filing something away to think about later. "I hope you find her." Caleb did not answer right away. He could not always trust his voice when the questions came from her, in her clear, small voice, without warning, on an ordinary morning, at an ordinary stoplight. He reached across, briefly, and squeezed her shoulder, and she leaned into the squeeze for half a second before the light turned green. He dropped her at the curb at Lakeview Elementary at 7:52, watched her backpack disappear through the school doors, and drove the rest of the way to Ashford Tower in silence. At the service entrance, the guard did not look up when Caleb pushed his badge into the reader. He never did. Caleb had been signing in at this gate for 3 years, and the guard had never once spoken his name. He had learned, somewhere in his 20s, that pointing those things out cost more than it returned, and that the cost did not get distributed evenly. He had also learned that there was no point being angry about it every day. The anger took something out of him that he needed for other things. He walked through the side corridor toward the locker room. A pair of office workers were waiting near the executive elevator, both holding paper coffee cups. One of them glanced at him as he passed, registered the work shirt and the color of his skin, and looked away with a small, practiced motion of someone who had decided he was not part of the morning that mattered. Caleb opened his locker. He took the small leather notebook out of his front pocket, opened it to the page he had marked the day before, and read his own handwriting for a moment before slipping it back into his shirt pocket. He had 2 lunches in his bag. He had a daughter who liked stars. He had a sister he had been looking for since he was 15 years old. He went to work. He took the freight elevator down to the 3rd subfloor and started on the air handling units in the central mechanical room. His hands moved through the routine, while his eyes tracked the laminated building schematics taped along the wall above the workbench. There was a pressure distribution flaw on the 12th floor, a mismatch between the original design specs and the hardware that had actually been installed during the last upgrade cycle. He had been watching the sensor readings drift for almost 2 weeks, the kind of error that waits years to become expensive. He recorded the new numbers in his notebook with a neat column of comparisons running down the left margin. No one saw him do it. No one ever looked. Caleb Thorne had been invisible by design for 3 years, and he had chosen the invisibility the same way he had chosen everything else in his life since the funeral, with both eyes open. Before this building, his name had appeared in federal procurement documents on 3 major projects, and his calculations had determined whether public structures held under load. In 2018, He had received the National Infrastructure Design Award for the seismic retrofit work he had led on the Meridian Federal Complex in Cleveland. He had been 35 years old at the ceremony. His wife had been alive then. His daughter had been 3. He had a photograph somewhere of the 3 of them on the stage that night. His wife in a navy dress, Wren, asleep against her shoulder. His wife died the next spring, in a single afternoon, from a clot no one had known to look for. Wren was 4. Caleb made the decision in the parking lot of the hospital, sitting in his car with the engine off, that whatever came next would be built around the school bell at 3:15. The senior engineering role did not bend that way. The travel did not bend that way. The on-call hours did not bend that way. Maintenance work did. He took a pay cut that would have horrified his old colleagues. He stopped answering recruitment calls. He moved across the country to a city where his name was not in anyone's Rolodex, applied for a job he was overqualified for at a building where no one knew him, and he showed up every morning for 3 years, and he did the work, and he kept his notebook. He had not mentioned the award. He had not mentioned the federal projects. No one in this building had ever asked. Part of that was the work he had chosen. Part of it, he knew without needing to belabor the point, was the work shirt and the color of his hands, and the assumption that came packaged with both. He had learned to wear the assumption like a coat. It was warmer than people expected. 2 contracted engineers walked past the open mechanical room door without acknowledging him. As they passed, one of them said, loud enough to carry, "The maintenance guys just need to know which end of the wrench is which. Don't let them anywhere near the actual systems." The other laughed. Caleb did not look up. He had heard that joke in various forms for 3 years now. Sometimes about maintenance workers in general, sometimes more specifically about him. He had stopped grading the variants. The variants were always the same shape underneath the surface. Even when the surface changed, he had decided, a long time ago, that the only response that would not cost him anything was no response at all. His phone vibrated in his pocket. A message from Wren's teacher. W. Wren was selected to display her drawing in the front hallway this week. Just wanted to share. He read it twice. He smiled, briefly, a small, private smile that he did not let anyone see, and slid the phone back into his pocket. 3 subfloors up, on the lobby level, a different morning was beginning, and a different woman was being made to wait. Rosie Vale arrived at Ashford Tower at 9:45 for a meeting that had been pushed back an hour without explanation. She waited in the VIP lounge near the elevator bank and did not complain about the delay. She was 28 years old, white, with light brown hair pulled back simply, and she had spent enough of her life learning the geography of buildings that were not built with her in mind to recognize the particular shape of the delay she was being given. Someone upstairs had decided her appointment was elastic. She had decided, a long time ago, that she would not perform indignation about it. A young attendant named Grace brought a glass of water on a small tray. Rosie read the lanyard at her hip and looked up. "Thank you, Grace," she said. "How long have you been here?" Grace blinked, the way people sometimes blinked at being addressed as themselves in the middle of a working day. 2 months, ma'am." "It's a beautiful building," Rosie said. "I imagine it's complicated to keep running." Grace smiled, slowly, the smile of a person who had received something she had not been expecting. "It is," she said. "Thank you for asking." She walked back toward her station with a slightly different posture than she had walked over with. Rosie watched her go. Then she reached into the inside pocket of her wool jacket and took out a small metal toy car. It was the size of a large grape, painted red once, but mostly the color of bare metal now, with one wheel that had lost all its paint from being rubbed by a child's thumb for 23 years. She set it on her lap and ran the pad of her thumb along the underside. There was a groove there, almost imperceptible. 2 small, scratched letters that she had memorized with her fingers, long before she had ever memorized them with her eyes. She did not remember much from before Gerald Vale had found her. She had fragments. A road, a sound she did not have a name for, a voice very close to her ear saying, "Times, stay still, stay still." Then, a hospital room with a window too high to see out of, and the toy car already in her hand when she woke up. Gerald had pulled a chair up to her bed and stayed for 3 hours without being asked. He had come back the next morning, and the morning after that, until eventually he had not gone home. He had adopted her at 31 and raised her alone. He had told her, gently and consistently, that there had been someone before him, a brother. The hospital records had mentioned a teenage boy at the scene. Gerald had tried for years to find him. He had never had enough to go on. The boy's name had not been in the file. She was 28 now. She had never once left the toy car behind, even on the days when carrying it felt foolish. The elevator chimed. Sarah Ashford stepped out of it at 10:15 sharp, a charcoal suit, 8 people behind her, phone already open in her hand. Derek Moss met her at the glass doors with the practiced smile of a man who had learned that appearing collegial was more useful than being liked. He was 44, slightly soft in the shoulders, with a corporate handshake that arrived a half-second before it was wanted. His eyes moved briefly to Rosie's wheelchair, registered it, and moved on. A moment later, as a custodian in a gray uniform pushed a cleaning cart across the marble, Derek's eyes moved to him, registered the dark skin and the cart, and moved on, in exactly the same way, with exactly the same practiced indifference. Rosie noticed. She did not say anything. She filed it. The leadership meeting opened on the 31st floor at 10:20. Sarah took her seat at the head of the long glass table. Derek took the chair to her right, and a screen on the far wall was already cued to the first slide of the deck Sarah had been refining for 6 weeks. The proposal was clean. Replacing the in-house maintenance team with a third-party vendor would reduce operating costs by approximately 30%, with full transition possible inside a single quarter. The contracts had been drafted. The legal review was almost complete. Sarah presented it without ceremony, in the flat, efficient voice she used for things she expected to pass without debate. Derek nodded with the enthusiasm of someone who had quietly written half the plan himself, because he had. The vendor at the top of the recommended list was operated by his first cousin, a fact he had not disclosed to anyone in the room, or in human resources, or anywhere else that would have caused a problem. The compensation structure between them had already been mapped out over a series of dinners that did not appear on any expense report. All Derek needed was the decision. He waited for the right moment, and then he said, with the casual confidence of a man who had said similar things in similar rooms many times before, "Honestly, most of the in-house roster is unskilled labor anyway. Wrench and broom. We're not losing institutional knowledge. We're losing overhead." The phrase moved through the room without resistance. 3 people at the table nodded. One wrote it down. Nolan Reed, the youngest director by almost a decade, did not nod. He was 31, recently promoted, and had spent the previous week reviewing the building's full personnel files for an unrelated project. He had read the maintenance roster. He knew that 3 of the technicians Derek had just described as unskilled held active engineering credentials, 2 of them at the master's level. He also knew, because he had paid attention to who got described in which language in which meetings, that all 3 of those technicians were Black or Latino. The roster had a clear pattern. Derek's vocabulary had a clear pattern. The 2 patterns lined up neatly enough that Nolan had stopped pretending they were unrelated. He did not say any of this. He wrote a small, careful note in the margin of his legal pad, in handwriting too small for anyone nearby to read, and kept his pen moving. He had been at the company for 3 years and had spent most of that time learning when to push back and when to wait. This was a wait. The room was not interested in hearing him today, but he had photographed Derek's slide deck before walking in, and he had a copy of the maintenance roster in his desk drawer, and he had the email chain Derek had sent the week before. He would not need today. He might need tomorrow. Derek moved on to the transition timeline. The slide changed. Sarah took a sip of water. 2 floors below, in the ductwork corridor along the east wall, Caleb was replacing a damper actuator. Fragments of the meeting drifted down through the return vent above his head, distorted by the metal but clear enough in the pauses. He heard times in-house maintenance team. He heard times replaced. He heard times single quarter. He heard times unskilled labor. And he heard the small chorus of approving murmurs that followed it. He finished the actuator. He replaced the access panel. He signed the log. He moved to the next item on his shift list. His face did not change. He had been in enough buildings to know what those words led to. The only question was the timing. That afternoon, he picked Ren up at 3:15 as he always did. She climbed into the car with her backpack and her drawing folder, told him she had drawn a horse in art class, but that the horse had come out looking like a dog, and asked if they could have spaghetti for dinner. He said yes. He did not mention the meeting. He had decided, a long time ago, that the worry he carried at work would not be allowed to travel home in the seat next to her. Rosie's meeting ran long. By the time it ended, she had been at the tower for almost 3 hours, and her chair had been parked in 5 different rooms on 3 different floors. When she finally crossed the lobby toward the front entrance at 1:50 in the afternoon, she was tired, in the particular way that days like this made her tired. Not in her arms, in her jaw. The wheel of her chair caught the raised brass edging of the VIP carpet near the elevator bank and stopped. The carpet had been installed 3 months earlier by a designer who had not used a wheelchair in her life and had not asked anyone who did. Rosie shifted her weight and tried to roll over it. The brass held. Garrett, the head of lobby security, appeared at her side fast enough to indicate he had been watching from across the room. He was a heavy man in his early 50s with a flat haircut and a voice he used at volume, on purpose, because the volume was part of the point. He let the next sentence carry. "Ma'am, this section is reserved for executive and VIP access. There's an alternate corridor on the north side." "That corridor is under maintenance," Rosie said evenly. "The front desk directed me this way when I came in." Garrett exhaled, with visible patience, performed for the lobby. "I'm not responsible for what the front desk said. I'm responsible for this area. You'll need to find another route." Before she could answer, he reached down, took hold of both armrests of her chair, and pulled, hard, sideways, with more force than the situation required. The chair lurched. Rosie pitched to the right and caught herself against the armrest. Her jacket pocket swung open. The small metal toy car tumbled out and struck the marble with a clear, bright sound, and rolled almost 20 feet across the polished stone, before coming to rest near a cluster of people at the reception desk, who all looked down at it and did not move. Rosie watched it go. Her composure, worn carefully every day for 23 years, had a crack in it now. The second guard, younger, stepped in front of her chair. The lobby went quiet in the particular way lobbies went quiet when something was happening that they had not been built to witness. The maintenance corridor door opened. Caleb stepped out. He took in the scene in a single sweep, the way he took in any system before he touched it. The toy car alone on the marble, 20 feet from anyone. The woman in the wheelchair with her hand against an empty pocket. The 2 guards, one in front, one beside. Garrett's stance. The angle of the dome camera overhead. He walked to the toy car first. He bent, picked it up, and felt the weight of it sit in his palm, and something moved behind his ribs that he did not have time to name yet. He walked to the wheelchair, put the car into Rosie's open hand without speaking, and then turned and placed himself between her and the second guard. Garrett looked at him from boots to shoulders. The tool belt, the wrench, the dark skin, the unbothered face, and a half-smile moved across his mouth. "Back to the basement, buddy," he said. "This isn't your business." Caleb did not answer. Garrett took a step forward and put both hands flat on Caleb's shoulders and pushed. Caleb's boots did not move. Garrett pushed again, harder, with his weight behind it. Caleb's boots stayed exactly where they were. The lobby went still. Caleb turned his head slightly toward Garrett and spoke at a volume calibrated for the people within 10 feet. "You just shoved a wheelchair with a person in it," he said. "The camera above the reception desk has been recording since you walked over. You want to keep going?" Garrett's eyes flicked up to the dome camera near the ceiling. Its small red light was steady. His hands came off Caleb's shoulders, slowly, as if he were considering them. Caleb turned back to Rosie. He bent slightly so his face was closer to hers. "Are you all right?" he asked, in a different voice. Lower, the working voice gone. She nodded once. Her hand was tight around the toy car. He straightened. He looked at Garrett and at the second guard, and then he put his hand on the push handle at the back of the wheelchair and walked. He pushed Rosie straight across the VIP carpet, past the lounge chairs, past the reception desk, directly toward the elevator bank. He did not ask permission. He did not look back. Neither guard stopped him. Sarah Ashford, halfway across the room, had stopped mid-handshake with one of the European partners she had come down to escort to lunch. She watched Caleb reach the elevator, press the call button, then step aside so Rosie could enter first. She watched him hold the door. She watched the door close. She had seen thousands of people pass through this lobby over the years, and she had a quick and accurate set of categories for all of them. She did not know what category to put this man in. She found, uncomfortably, that this mattered to her. The European partner cleared his throat. Sarah remembered him. She finished the handshake and turned back toward the front entrance, with the particular smoothness of someone who had been trained to recover quickly. But the image of the man in the work shirt, walking a wheelchair straight through the VIP carpet without asking, stayed with her down the corridor and into the elevator, and most of the way through lunch. Twice during the meal, she lost the thread of the conversation. Once she had to ask her partner to repeat himself. He laughed it off. She did not. In the elevator, as the doors closed, Rosie looked down at the toy car in her lap. Her thumb found the worn groove on the underside without her looking. She looked up at the man in the work shirt beside her. "You're going to get in trouble for that," she said. "Probably." "Why did you do it anyway?" Caleb watched the floor numbers climb. "Because there wasn't a good enough reason not to." She looked at him for a long second, up close. She could see the line of his jaw, the small scar at the corner of his left eye, the careful steadiness of someone who had decided not to be hurried by other people's panic. She wanted to ask him something else. She did not know yet what it was. The doors opened on the second floor, where there was a ramp to the front mezzanine that bypassed the lobby entirely. He stepped out first, held the doors for her, and waited until her chair had cleared. "Thank you," she said, before the doors closed. He nodded once. The doors closed. He took the elevator down to the third subfloor and walked back to the mechanical room and stood there for a moment, with his hands flat on the workbench. He looked at his palm. He could still feel the weight of the toy car in it. He had carried the memory of another car, almost the same weight, almost the same size, for 23 years. He had taught himself slowly, over the course of those 23 years, not to let the memory press too hard against the present, because letting it press too hard had been damaging him in ways he could no longer afford. He pressed his palm flat against the workbench and breathed and went back to work. That night, after dinner and bath time, Wren sat at the kitchen table with her colored pencils while Caleb had his coffee. She was drawing something she would not show him yet. She kept the paper angled away with her elbow, the way she did when something was important. She had been working on it for almost an hour, and she had used 3 different shades of purple. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, without looking up. "Someone I've been missing for a long time." Wren nodded, as if this were the answer she had expected. She added a small figure in the lower corner of her drawing. Someone new, arriving from the edge of the page. She did not tell him about it. She kept working. The central HVAC system on the 12th floor failed the following afternoon during a board presentation. The temperature in the main conference room climbed 5 degrees in 20 minutes and continued climbing. 3 engineers from the contracted maintenance firm stood at the control panel for 23 minutes and did not resolve anything. They cycled the system twice. They restarted the controller. They pulled up the schematics on a laptop and frowned in the particular way that engineers frown when they are pretending to understand something they do not. Nolan Reed, whose office was on the same floor, stepped into the hallway with his laptop under one arm. The board chair had asked him twice already whether the air would be back, and he had run out of variations on times they're working on it. Caleb came down the corridor with a diagnostic bag over his shoulder, on his way to a routine check in the east stairwell. Nolan stopped him. "Can you take a look at this?" Nolan asked. "I know you're not on their crew, but there's a server room 2 doors down and we've got a board sitting in there cooking." Caleb had already stopped at the panel. He looked at it for 4 seconds. "Thermal sensor on the B-level return duct. Miscalibrated at installation," he said. "It's reading 8 degrees low. So the system thinks conditions are stable when they aren't. Compressor's throttling itself." One of the contracted engineers laughed, short and flat. "That's cute," he said, turning to his partner. "The maintenance tech is going to diagnose a $2 million climate system. You read blueprints in your spare time, buddy." The sentence sat in the air. Nolan heard it land. He registered the Times buddy and the slight emphasis on Times maintenance tech. It was the kind of sentence built to be deniable, and it was deniable. Nolan had stopped, pretending he could not hear it. Caleb did not react. He opened the small leather notebook from his breast pocket and turned to a page in the middle and held it out to Nolan. Nolan looked at the page. It was a detailed schematic of the 12th floor HVAC system, drawn in a tight, clean hand, accurate to scale, with the location of the miscalibrated sensor circled in red, and a note in the margin dated 6 days earlier. Return duct B level. Calibration drift. Confirm and recalibrate. Caleb closed the notebook. He walked past the 3 contracted engineers, opened the access panel, located the sensor in under 30 seconds, made the calibration adjustment with a tool from his belt, and verified the new reading against the system log on his tablet. He closed the panel. The compressor on the wall above them shifted tone and settled into its normal hum. The temperature indicators ticked back, one by one. 9 minutes total. The 3 contracted engineers did not speak. Nolan was still holding the notebook. He turned back through the previous pages. What he found there was not the record of a maintenance technician. Each page was dense, with notation. Schematics, drawn to scale. Pressure readings cross-referenced against manufacturer specifications. Load calculations that ran several layers deeper than anything required for routine upkeep. Handwritten, methodical. The work of someone who had been doing this kind of thinking for a long time at a much higher level than the badge on his chest suggested. "Hey," Nolan called. "Can I keep this for 10 minutes? Caleb stopped at the end of the corridor. He looked back. He looked at Nolan's face for a long moment. 10 minutes, he said. Nolan took the notebook to his office and photographed 12 pages with his phone. Because he understood that asking out loud would close a door, he was not sure he wanted closed. Rosie had finished a call in the corridor and had turned at the sound of the panel door. She watched through the glass partition as Caleb worked, hands deliberate, no wasted motion, the posture of someone for whom this was a fraction of what he was trained for. She watched the contracted engineers fail to meet his eyes when he passed them. She looked down at the toy car in her jacket pocket. She had been carrying a question since the elevator the day before, and the question had a shape now, even if it did not yet have words. The termination report, bearing Caleb Thorne's name, was submitted to the Human Resources System at 2:47 that afternoon. 2 days after the lobby incident, Derek Moss filed it under his own operational authority. It cited obstruction of security personnel and interference with authorized building protocol. It recommended immediate separation without severance consideration. Derek wrote it in under 20 minutes, which left him time to make 3 other calls before the end of the business day. Sarah Ashford received it as one of 12 operational approvals bundled for her review at 3:15. She signed it in a 3-minute window between calls because it had come through Derek's desk, and Derek's desk was supposed to handle this kind of thing correctly. She did not read it word by word. She would return to this fact later, when she had more time, and she would not like what she found. Caleb found the envelope in his locker at the end of his shift. He stood in the empty changing room and read the letter once, then a second time, then folded it in thirds and put it in his front pocket beside his notebook. He sat down on the bench for about a minute, hands on his knees. The fluorescent light above the lockers buzzed faintly. Then he stood up, completed the last 2 items on his maintenance log, because he was not a man who left things unfinished, and returned his diagnostic equipment to the storage room before clearing his locker. He took down a small photograph that had been taped to the inside of his locker door for 3 years. It was worn at the edges from the corner of his thumb, passing over it every morning. A little girl with brown hair and a gap-toothed smile, 4 years old, laughing at whoever was holding the camera. He looked at it the way you look at something that has been a fixed point for 23 years, then slid it into his wallet behind his license. He shouldered his canvas bag and walked out. Nolan Reed was waiting for him at the end of the corridor. He fell into step beside him and kept his voice low. "I know about the termination report," Nolan said. "I also know it was filed 16 minutes after you intervened in the lobby. That's not an investigation. That's a response." "That's not your problem," Caleb said. "I looked you up," Nolan said. "C. Thorne, National Infrastructure Design Award, 2018. Lead engineer, Meridian Federal Complex. The retrofit on the south wing of the Cleveland courthouse is in 2 textbooks I had in school. Caleb stopped walking. He turned and looked at Nolan for a long moment, without confirmation, without denial, and then he walked on. Rosie heard the news from Grace, who told her with the careful, half-apologetic tone of someone who felt responsible for what she was passing on. The maintenance worker. The one who helped you in the lobby, they let him go this morning. Rosie was very still. For what reason? The report said, obstruction of security staff. Rosie said nothing for several seconds. She was looking at the middle distance, at something that was not there. Then she took out her phone and stepped into the empty conference room and closed the door behind her. Gerald Vale picked up on the second ring. He was 68 years old, and the sound of her voice, even when it was level, told him what kind of call this was before she had said 3 words. "Dad," she said, "I need you to do something." "Tell me," she told him. She spoke for almost 4 minutes without stopping, the toy car still in her hand. When she finished, Gerald was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "All right." That was all he said, because it was all that needed to be said, and because the next conversation he had was with his attorney. Caleb walked out of the Ashford Towers main entrance at 4:54 in the afternoon. The October air had sharpened since morning, and the low sun turned the building's glass face amber. He stopped at the top of the entrance steps and looked back through the lobby doors for 1 second. Then he walked down to the sidewalk. "Caleb." He turned. Rosie was on the pavement near the curb, her breath making small shapes in the cold air. She had moved fast. He had not heard her come out behind him. "You lost your job because of me," she said. "I lost my job because I made a choice. Those aren't the same thing." She held his gaze. "Can I ask you something?" She reached into her jacket and brought out the small metal toy car. She held it up between them. "There are letters carved into the bottom of this," she said. "They've been there as long as I can remember. I've never asked anyone what they meant. I always thought I would know when it mattered." She turned the car over in the thin afternoon light. Caleb looked at it. He had been carrying a version of this image in his memory for more than 2 decades. A toy car slightly too large for a small child's fist. Bought at a hardware store on Dempster Street in Evanston for $4 and change. On a Saturday afternoon when he was 15 years old, he had scratched the letters into the underside himself with his pocket knife. Crouching on the carpet of the bedroom he shared with his 5-year-old sister, while she napped on the lower bunk. "C is for Caleb," he said. His voice came out quieter than he meant it to. "R is for Rosie. I put them there the day she turned 5. Rosie's hand tightened, slowly, around the car. She looked at the letters on the underside, then at him, then at the letters again, as if the second look would tell her something the first one had missed. It did not. "Your sister," she said. Her name was Rosie. The street noise around them, the buses, the voices. A delivery truck braking at the corner, compressed, and pulled away. They stood inside it as if they had stepped into a different kind of space. Caleb lowered himself slowly until he was on one knee on the cold sidewalk, level with her face. He did not speak. He just looked at her, the shape of her face, the line of her jaw, the way she held herself completely still over something that was very much not still at all. He had imagined this moment in the rationed way you allow yourself to imagine things you do not fully trust yourself to want. He had not imagined it on a sidewalk in October. Rosie pulled out her phone with her free hand and scrolled to a scanned photograph Gerald had found in her hospital belongings when she was 6. A child in a striped shirt, holding a toy car up toward the camera with both hands, laughing. Caleb pulled the small photograph from his wallet and held it up. The same child, the same car, the same outstretched arms. He turned his face briefly toward the street, toward nothing in particular, and was quiet for a long time. He had not let himself want this in a fully formed way in a very long time. Sarah Ashford, from a window on the 2nd floor, looked down at the plaza. The man from the lobby was on one knee in front of the woman in the wheelchair. Both of them were completely still. She did not understand what she was watching. She stayed at the glass longer than she had expected to. 2 days later, the executive conference room on the 31st floor was fuller than it had been in months. The doors opened. Gerald Vale walked in, unhurried, with his attorney on one side and Rosie behind him. Derek Moss, who was already recommending an immediate legal counter-response, stopped mid-sentence. Gerald sat across from Sarah. He set his hands flat on the table. "I'm not here to negotiate terms," he said. "I'm here to answer the question you've been trying to answer for 2 days. 3 days ago, my daughter was physically pushed by 2 of your security personnel. A maintenance employee stepped in on her behalf. Within 24 hours, that employee was terminated. I want to understand who made that decision." Sarah looked at Derek. It was a look of perhaps 2 seconds, level, without heat, but Derek felt the full weight of it. He leaned forward. The termination followed standard protocol. The employee in question interfered with. "How many items in that report are fabricated?" Every head in the room turned toward the door. Nolan Reed was standing there with a manila folder. He walked to the table, set it in front of Sarah, and took a position to the side. Inside the folder were 3 documents. A timestamp system log showing the termination report had been created at 2:47. Email correspondence between Derek Moss and a facilities management company operated by his first cousin, discussing compensation contingent on the vendor contract being awarded. A summary of the lobby camera footage. The report was filed at 2:47, Nolan said. Caleb Thorne intervened in the lobby at 2:31. 16 minutes. Not enough time for a review. Enough time to retaliate. Sarah raised one hand without looking at Derek. She turned to her general counsel. "Suspend all personnel actions filed through Derek's office in the last 30 days. Open an independent review. Derek is on administrative leave effective this moment." An hour later, she walked down to the plaza. Caleb was on the stone bench at the edge. She offered him his position back. He declined. "I want to do the work I was actually trained for." "Gerald Vale's acquisition offer includes a staffing condition," she said. "Director of Engineering, someone qualified to address the 12th floor pressure mismatch and the load-bearing issue your predecessor's contractor signed off on without verifying in 2019. She paused. "His daughter mentioned you." Caleb stood. They shook hands. 2 weeks later, in a quiet Italian restaurant in Lincoln Park, Gerald, Caleb, Wren, and Rosie sat at a table together. Wren was wearing the sweater with the horse on it. Gerald stood when they came in, looked at Caleb the way you look at someone you know a great deal about without ever having met, and said, "Thank you for what you did in the lobby." Caleb said, "I didn't know who she was." Gerald said, "I know, that's why I'm thanking you." Wren slid a purple crayon drawing across the table to Rosie. A house with a blue roof. 4 figures out front. 1 in a wheelchair. "I drew everyone. That one's you." Rosie looked at it for a long time, then set it carefully beside her water glass. "It's perfect." Sarah came by at 8:15, did not sit, and set a sealed envelope near Caleb's coffee cup. No rush. Late that night, after Wren had fallen asleep in the car, Caleb opened the envelope at his kitchen table. Director of Engineering, Ashford Capital Group. He signed it, turned off the light, and stood for a while outside Wren's door listening to the slow, even sound of her breathing, the breathing of someone who had no idea anything was ever missing. Neither of them had been looking, but the right thing had found them anyway.